Welcome, welcome, welcome. We have some more people joining us. Good afternoon. I'm Summer Sibley Brown. Welcome to today's plenary. Thank you for joining us. Just give it a few moments. And I think we're here. Lynn, could you pull up the first slide and I'll start? Hello, hello, hello to all our participants. Thank you for joining us today for our final panel of 6 plenaries over the course of 3 weeks of the Regenerate Conference on Resilience in Uncertain Times. Right? Thank you for joining us. We want to welcome you. Lynn, next slide. We are so excited this afternoon to have you at session 6, activating where you are, community engagement in rural spaces. I think as we go over some of the themes that we have explored this conference, the high level themes we're talking about collaboration and equity and resilience, and really the human centeredness of regenerative work has come up in all of these panels, and like the way we celebrate our relationship to the land. So I'm actually in St. Croix, US Virgin Islands, and I'll do a land acknowledgement because that's something that has been super important throughout our 3 weeks together. So I am standing, working, and living in the land that would originally have been Injiri, Taino, and the Arawakan speaking people, also the Caribs, where the word Caribbean actually comes from. And so if you think about where you are and you want to place your land acknowledgement in the chat, we would be really grateful to have that. And if you want to just hold it there and acknowledge where you are for yourself, that's also something that we would love for you to do, but just thinking about place and who was here before we were. Next slide. Today we have 4 awesome panelists who will spend the next 2 hours sharing their experience activating community. And I think that I'll take the liberty to say that one of the blessings of having these young, vibrant, inspirational voices sharing their work and their experience with the New Agrarian program is that, you know, one of the panelists said it's not regenerative if you don't know who you're passing it to, right? So in our work, part of thinking through sustainable or regenerative work is having someone to take the work on. And I think that's probably the embodiment of this program, which we'll hear more of. Today, our speakers are Ben Gotschall, Kate Clyatt, Marianna Zavala, and Shalini Karra. And I'm so excited to hear their stories. Next slide. But first, I'm going to take you through just some of the logistics that you are accustomed of seeing, right? So we're going to do the welcome and framing. There will be a check-in question to help us all land, which we will put in the chat. Speaker intros, and then we're going to have conversations in rounds of themes, where there will be 3 sets of conversations. And so it will be the first conversation, which is around community, then a short, very short mini round of Q&A, then the next theme, culture, another mini round of Q&A. Last theme is resilience, and then we will have a deeper version of question and answer and our checkout. Next slide. We're also going to go over just some of the etiquette of how we participate in this space. So please type your name. As you are sharing in the chat or even out loud, we ask you to speak from your experience, listen to learn, and give space to others. Cameras on if you would like. Mute when you're not speaking to take down the background noise. Presence, patience, and empathy. I think another theme of the Regenerate Conference is community, and community is built on presence, patience, and empathy. Please amplify value. So be minded that everyone can see the chat and let the comments that we share really add value to the conversation and uplift where we're going in terms of building community. There is no right and wrong. This is about lived experience. And please allow for guidance and facilitation by those who are hosting the conference. Next slide. And these are some of the basics. If you need to rename yourself, you will go to the three dots in the corner and it will say rename. There's the camera on and off button. And there's also that circular where it says chat. That's super important because we'll be asking you to input some of your participation via the chat. If you're having issues with tech, there is a number. Please call 505-393-1355. I'm going to say it slowly again because someone may be calling in. So for those participants on the phone, it's 505-393-1355. Next slide. We just did the tech support. If you have any questions or concerns regarding something said or happening during the session, please message a host privately. We have volunteers, we have co-facilitators, and so they're named, and that's an example. It says volunteer in the person's names. And just a reminder that in community, one of the things we ask people to do is please take care of yourself. You know, if you need to step away, get water, stretch, go to the bathroom, turn your camera off, you know, just really, we want you to be fully present in the best way that you can be in the moment. Next slide. So there's going to be that. So now for the check-in question. And I'm just going to ask you all to take a moment and take a breath with me. I talked a lot of logistically things, and now I want you to really become present so you can connect with our panelists, who I'm so again excited to hear from. And the question is, where are you joining us from today? And what brings you here? And what are you hoping to learn or discuss? Where are you joining us from today? What brings you here? And what are you hoping to learn or discuss? You can type those into the chat, and I am going to prepare to transition to Alexis.
All right, Summer, thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that we're asking a lot for you to take 2 hours out of your day to spend with us, and I just want to recognize that because this conference has been amazing. We've had amazing speakers, and this is the last plenary session. And I would like to take a moment to thank all of the conference organizers and all of the volunteers who staffed our plenaries, our keynotes, and our workshops, because I think it has been an enormous undertaking of coordination to pull it all together. And it's something that my brain would not have been able to accomplish. So if we could all just take a moment and give a silent round of applause to my colleague, Leah Potterwaite, who's done an amazing job coordinating everything, and the rest of the conference staff, that would be wonderful. And I want to give as much time as possible to our panelists, but I'm going to take a moment here to orient us as to why this topic, why these people, and why now. And those of you who don't know me, my name is Alexis Bonagowski, and I work for the Quivira Coalition in Montana. I think it's important to note that both sides of my family, my dad's side came from Russia, they homesteaded in North Dakota, and my mom's side came from Norway, and they homesteaded in Montana. And my family, as well as all of us homesteading families, were beneficiaries of the United States government removal and genocide of Native people. And I think that that's extremely important to recognize when we start talking about these issues. Those farms in both sides of my families were on the ancestral homelands of the Blackfeet, Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, and the farm that I grew up on and currently live on is in the homelands of the Absaluka tribe, also known to most people as the Fur Nation. So my job with Quivira is to coordinate the Northern Geographic Region of the new agrarian program, which all of us affectionately call NAP, which I'm sure is an activity that none of our mentors or apprentices actually ever get to do. The NAP program pairs up ranchers and farmers who are practicing regenerative agriculture with apprentice agrarians for 8 months paid apprenticeships. And we have quite a lineup of mentor ranches this year in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and California. So if you're interested in applying or learning more, please head on over to our website, which I'm sure one of our staff members will helpfully dump into the chat box. Many of our apprentices this year wrestled with questions while they were on their ranches about what to do. So this year was, everyone knows it, we all witnessed a pandemic unfold. We witnessed the effects of generational police violence against people of color, social upheaval, political polarization. And all of this is extremely hard to deal with in and of itself, but it's even harder to deal with when you are in a new place, dealing with a new cultural setting, away from your friends and family, and not able to travel or socialize much. And so these questions arose over and over again about what people could do and what their responsibility was at the moment in time. So what can I do where I am with what I have available to me? And I think we all ask ourselves those questions. But luckily, we know that there are young agrarians who have agreed to join us today. Some from, like Ben, who came from an agricultural setting in Nebraska, and some who chose this life later on, who are now living and working in rural communities, and I think adapting to and changing the world around them in amazing ways. And so today we are going to have a conversation about community, culture, and resilience with Ben and Marianna and Shalini and Kate. And we're going to talk about these concepts that I think can be nebulous and unwieldy in the abstract, but they deserve our efforts to make them real, to contextualize them, and to be able to hold them in our hands and move them around a little bit. These four very brave people are going to talk with us today about questions of community, of engagement, of motivation, of struggle, of responsibility, of power, and of connection. And I greatly admire all of them for being willing to discuss these issues with all of us. And I think we all know that there's no hard and fast answer to any of these questions we'll be asking, but just knowing that we're all dealing with these questions is important. And we know that no two paths in agriculture are the same, and no two experiences are the same. And so we hope to show you that although their stories are different and their challenges are different, that all of them have chosen to wrestle with hard questions, not walk away from them or pretend that they don't exist. And they have chosen to take responsibility. And so I am so grateful to have Ben, Shalini, Marianna, and Kate here to spend the next 2 hours with us. And I want to encourage you to ask questions when they come up in the chat box. We will have someone monitoring those questions and be able to take some of those out and really ask them those questions that you have, and also the ones that we've sort of come up for them. So that is it for me. And I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and tell their story, so you can get sort of a sense for who they are and where they came from. And we are going to start with Ben Gotschall, originally from Nebraska, but he'll tell you about where he is now. So Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Alexis, and thank you for including me in this discussion. I was very happy to be invited and looking forward to this time with everyone. As Alexis said, I was born on a ranch in the Sandhills of Nebraska, and spent the formative, first 18 years of my life there. Then went to college and did not take the agriculture route then. My formal training is in poetry. I went to school for creative writing and then taught for a while, taught English literature and writing in college for a few years. And through that kind of got sent down a different track of environmental activism, fighting the Keystone XL pipeline, which was proposed to run right through the Nebraska Sandhills and the recharge zone of the High Plains Aquifer, where I was from. And so got pretty heavily involved in that fight with an organization called Bold Nebraska, and also with some other groups, traveled all across the United States, really helping organize people in different parts of this country against tar sands pipelines and other dirty energy projects, as well as working with the Council of Canadians up in Canada with their organizing against the Energy East pipeline up there. And then I basically just kind of came to the realization and decision that I felt that I could do just as much, if not more, for the climate and for the people and places that I cared about by becoming active again in agriculture. And although I never really left it behind, I then started farming full time with grass-fed dairy. You can go to the next slide. Settled down, started a family, and started making cheese and butter and bottling milk and selling milk and beef and cheese direct to consumer. So very much got involved in the farm to table movement, started direct marketing products, and now I am at Wolf's Neck Center in Freeport, Maine. I've been here for almost 3 weeks, so I'm new here. So I'm interested in learning more about the history of this place. But from my initial research on some of that, this is the traditional homeland of the Abenaki people within the Wabanaki language group. But again, I must confess ignorance on that. So hopefully I will be able to learn more the longer I'm here. So thank you again, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
All right, thanks, Ben. And I just have to say I met Ben when I was facilitating some regenerative ranching meetings in Nebraska one year, and I remember him getting up. It was so, it's etched into my memory. He was getting up to speak to a bunch of farmers, and he said, I don't grow a product for a market, I grow food for people. And I just remember that, and I've always remembered that. And Ben and I have stayed in touch ever since. So thanks for doing this, Ben. Okay, we're gonna move it over to Shalini.
Hey everyone, so I'm Shalini. I grew up in a suburban town a little bit north of Los Angeles with no connection to the agricultural world besides the food that I ate, an occasional farmer's market, and maybe like a pumpkin patch that my parents took us to when we were younger. And then in college, as any 18-year-old doesn't know what they wanted to do, I didn't, and I was trying all these different courses. And I had a person in my dorm right across the hall, and she was studying animal science as a pre-vet. And I realized I spent more time going through her notes and helping her study because of my interest level, that I thought, hey, maybe I could go into pre-vet. Coming from a South Asian family, you know, it's very much doctor, engineer, lawyer. So I was like, okay, well, I can be a doctor of animals and still kind of follow my passion for animals through that facet. Which led me in the most wonderful circumstance to take Rob Rutherford's sheep management class at Cal Poly. And Rob Rutherford is a huge proponent of holistic management. So my very first introduction to agriculture was through the lens of holistic management, which I am so grateful for because it's given me a wonderful perspective and a passion for agriculture. So after graduating, again, not really knowing what I wanted to do, my parents were kind of pushing me to apply for grad school and start going down the whole route of the veterinary science. And I made a snap decision to woof which is working on organic farms in a work trade sort of setting in Ireland, because I wanted to follow where the sheep were. And in my mind, sheep are in Ireland. And it was there, and I had this aha moment, which is really odd, and people kind of laugh at me for it, but I was knee deep in our sow pen, cleaning it out. And it came to me that I am so happy right now. Like, I am knee deep in pig feces, and I'm happy, and I'm producing food. And that was kind of the moment where my life shift towards agriculture. And so when I came back from that year, I wasn't really sure even how someone like me would even start to get into ag. And I remember Rob telling me about Quivira Coalition, and I had seen this beautiful ranch in Colorado on their website, and I decided to apply for their NAP apprenticeship. And thank goodness, I see that George and Julie are on here. Thank goodness so much for you guys accepting me, because it was life-changing. Those are the kind of the pictures on the right-hand side of that slide. I mean, you guys took someone in who was crazy green, and I didn't know anything. My first experiences with livestock were in Ireland, so I had no practical real knowledge, and you guys took me under their wing and really showed me the beauty of raising quality proteins for our community. Next slide. So my apprenticeship was a little bit different, that it wasn't the whole year, and it ended in November, and it happened to end at the same time that the Quivira conference was going on that year. And so my last day as a NAP apprentice, I sat in on a half-day workshop that was led by Gabe and Paul Brown. I knew that from my experience in Ireland, I wanted to be on an operation that utilized the diversity of enterprises, the diversity of livestock. And here these two North Dakotans came. I had no idea who they were, and how much of a big deal they were in our regenerative ag world, as far as the leaps and bounds that they have made with their soil health. But I met them at the Career Connection. I was like, well, you guys have all of the things that I want to learn about. Might as well see if I can get a part of your ranch and learn from you guys. So I joined them as a 6-month intern, and fell in love with the prairie, fell in love with Paul, and now I'm a permanent fixture on the Browns Ranch, where we've been working to learn how to direct market all of our meat to a community that might not be as open to it as the coasts. People are very set in their ways up here, but we're working on education, knowing that a nutrient-dense diet is going to be a boost to your immune system, and then working with our farmers markets and local restaurants around here. But I really appreciate you guys for having me on here, and thank you.
Thanks, Shalini. I can't believe that we hadn't met in person before, but next time I'm out in North Dakota, I'm stopping by. So, all right, we're gonna move over to Marianna.
I love people. Goodness gracious, this is so phenomenal, even though my hands are just crazy sweaty right now. Hi, everyone. My name is Marianna Zavala. I just want to thank the Quivira team really quickly. Leah, Alexis, I know all y'all at Quivira just have this whole setup in the background, just buzzing back and forth. Have been witness to it as a former NAP apprentice, and just y'all do such good work. So I'm really, really grateful, and also super grateful for the speakers. Some of you I've met before, and some of you I haven't, but just really happy to share the space. But that being said, a little bit about me. So I was born and raised in Napa Valley, which might sound really familiar to a lot of you as the place of the very expensive wine and rolling hills covered in vineyards. And I really, looking back now, I'm so grateful for the childhood that I had. I grew up, going to the vineyards with my dad, who worked for both Robin Mondavi and Opus One Vineyards, which are very, very big wineries in Napa Valley. And so I spent a lot of time with him as a little girl, being surrounded by Spanish and these beautiful, warm smiles and faces that looked like my dad's. And people during their lunch break grilling tortillas on a comal out in the field, and just being filled with like a kind of love that I didn't understand at that point. And on the flip side, spending a lot of time with my mom and her parents, who own a small ranch in a place called Wooden Valley, just over the hill from Napa. And it was about 230 acres of really beautiful oak woodland, beautiful riparian area. And so I spent a lot of my childhood running through those creeks and finding feathers and all kinds of romantic things. Something about me, I was raised in a mixed race household. So my dad was Mexican American and my mom is white. And so for me, as I got older in that environment, growing up in Napa, I began to see the dichotomy that existed within that community, which was either you owned the vineyards and you sold the wine and you made a lot of money, and you were likely white, or you were like my dad and you worked in the field. And this kind of realization as a 12-year-old can really mess with you. And so I began to question a lot of things about where I grew up and the experiences that I had. But I knew that agriculture and being in that environment was something really important to me. So I ended up applying as an ag major to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, holla Shalini. And I had no idea what I was doing, absolutely zero idea, but had a very similar experience that, that I want to echo, where I remember it was my dairy husbandry class freshman year of college, and walked all the way out to the dairy unit, 20 minutes away from main campus, and just spent it learning about the calves and learning about the milking system, and just came back to the dorms smelling absolutely awful. And everybody in the dorms knew who it was because they knew that I was in that class. I was so happy. So, fast forward that by a few years, when I graduated, I had the opportunity to intern at a place called Swanton Pacific Ranch, which holds a really dear spot in my heart. And Swanton Pacific Ranch is owned by Cal Poly. It's kind of an educational laboratory. And so they have about 1,000 acres of rangeland, 1,000 acres of holistically sustainably managed forest, and then about 1,000 acres of cropland. And so I was a livestock intern, and I was under the tutelage of Gordon Clausen, who is a huge holistic management buff. And really that was my first introduction to what it meant to be out on the land and working with livestock, and what stockmanship and stewardship really meant. For folks that don't know, actually probably a lot of you know, is California has been really devastated by fires this year. And so unfortunately, Swanton Pacific Ranch took a heavy hit, a heavy toll. So for those of you that are familiar with Swanton, I would say sign up for their emails and just see how you can support, because it's a wonderful place and they're working on recovering. So yeah, was an intern at Swanton. And then I bounced back and forth in the Bay Area for a little over a year. I worked for farmers markets. I worked in marketing and community outreach. I dabbled in writing, as well as farmers market education. And then that kind of big pull came where I couldn't stop thinking about the time out at Swanton. And so I took a big leap in March of 2018? No, 2017. And I went to work for a small ranching family in southern Colorado, in a place called Antonito, which is south of a place called Alamosa in the beautiful San Luis Valley. And that I think was really a catalyst for a lot of this journey. And it was in that place and in that space that I got to meet so many wonderful people, which some of who I see on this call, San Juan Ranch, hi, I love you, Cindy Villa, Kate Clyatt. It was just the start of these beautiful relationships and understanding what it meant to be in a landscape with a community of people and to really feel altered by it, and to want to do good. And so following that time in Southern Colorado, I became a NAP apprentice with Round River Resource Management, which is a 56,000 acre ranch owned by the Nature Conservancy about an hour east of Colorado Springs. And it's managed by Lewis Martin, who I think is also on this call, and spent another 8 months there, really honing in some stockmanship skill. And for somebody who came from, a densely populated Bay Area, and Shalini, I'd love to get your take on this at some point, like, go out to a space where all you can see is sky was ultimately very terrifying to start with. And to see how that relationship progressed throughout the months was a really amazing thing. And since that point, I moved back to California to take care of my family. I was hired as an intern and then as an apprentice by Tomcat Ranch here in Pescadero, and that is where I still am now. And I currently manage their grass-fed beef business, and I get to work a few times with the cows every month. And I'm also working deeply in community with a local nonprofit here, working on some food security issues. So that has been my journey thus far.
Thank you, Marianna. All right, we're gonna move over to Kate.
Hello. It's great to be here. Great to hear everyone's stories. Great to, it's been awesome to meet these other speakers. So I'm really happy for this opportunity. Thanks so much. So I'm also originally from the great state of California. I did not grow up in an urban area. I grew up in Mount Shasta, which is just south of the Oregon border, and in an ag and timber community. I was sort of peripherally involved. I did 4-H, but at that time I was destined to become a professional river dancer, so I took more interest in that than cows. And then time came to pick a major in college, and I became really interested in forestry and natural resources, primarily because I learned about that relationship between production and land stewardship. And for forestry, it was the idea that you could harvest a product, wood, that we utilize for all of our infrastructure, and but do it in a way that mimicked the natural disturbance of that landscape. And so I sort of followed that passion out to Montana and did a graduate degree here in Montana in forestry. And then after my degree, I took a job working as a forestry consultant all over the Northern Rockies, primarily Montana, but would go over to the Dakotas or Wyoming and Idaho, and was working mostly for private landowners and a lot of large ranches here in Montana. And as I got into it, I was really struck by the fact that here we were sort of focusing on one resource, the timber, without really taking a look at all of the other resources, and how they interact. And especially in the arid Rocky Mountain West, you see a lot of places where, timberlands and rangeland are hard to distinguish, especially with encroachment issues. And so managing trees without managing grass or water or soil started to make a lot less sense to me. And so between that and my job becoming more of an office job than I was comfortable with, I decided to look for opportunities to get into ranching. And it took me honestly about a year to sort of not only make that leap, but also find the opportunity, because it seemed pretty overwhelming to be able to get a start in ranching. And I felt like there was this misconception that unless you're born into it, maybe it's not a space you can enter. And so I was really thrilled to find the new agrarian program and was able to get hired on with Triangle P Cattle Company down in southern New Mexico on the Mescalero Apache Reservation, and got to work out there for a year. And it was really, really awesome, and taught me a lot, not only about cowboying, but about creating community when you live an hour down a dirt road from anywhere in a state that you know two people. And so that was a really great experience that way. And then from there, I sort of, from that community, got another shorter term apprenticeship back up here in Montana. And then from that opportunity and that community, moved into the Mannix Family Ranch when they had a new agrarian program opening. And the rest is history, I guess. I am still here on the Mannix Family Ranch. Similar to Shalini, I also fell in love. And so it looks like I will be here forever. And I'm really looking forward to that. I am really enamored by this community. If you go to the next slide, just, brought up some pictures of my community here, what community means to me. The top right picture is some friends that stayed up for 3 days with me night calving this spring, stayed up all night and came out with me, and neither of them had ever touched a cow or logged a calf onto a four-wheeler before. The bottom left corner is, I think, the entire Mannix family all changing the tire on my trailer that I was hauling with earlier this year, and answers the question, how many ranchers does it take to change a tire? The bottom right picture is at my head shaving party this year when I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and had a number of my friends shave their heads with me, and that was a really special moment, and especially sort of in this era of not being able to gather. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing more about my community here and sharing this space with all of you guys. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. All right, we're gonna actually start with Kate again for the next question. And so, like I said, we're gonna talk about community and culture and resilience. And so the first topic, overarching topic, is community. And we asked each of the panelists to think about what it means to them, like where is their community, who are they, and how do they build it where they're at? And I think it's going to look different for all of them. And so we're gonna go straight to Kate. And I definitely encourage everyone who is watching right now, if you have questions as any of the speakers are talking, please put them in the chat, and we will hold on to those, because we're going to have time after this portion to actually share some of those. So I'm going to ask Kate to begin this next section.
Cool. Well, and if you'll pull up the next slide. So thinking about this question, I would say I'm a bit of a student for community, just having lived in a lot of different places across the West. I grew up in a tight-knit community, 3,000 people live in Mount Shasta. You sort of knew everybody. And as I was moving around for a number of years, I was sort of looking for that. And then I would say in the Blackfoot Valley, where I now live, I sort of found the mecca of community. And there's only 275 inhabitants of my town, and or unincorporated village, and a few hundred others throughout the valley. But as I like to say about Helmville, I feel like it has a soul that's greater than the sum of its parts. And so here's just some photos of things to me that feel like community. The first one is this year when we had a haystack fire. We burned down a lot of our hay. And everyone showed up. People stayed until 2 in the morning. It turned into a party. It was, of course, a devastating event, but to be in a place where people will really show up for you, I think is incredible. And that's sort of one of the things I think about most fundamentally with community is people who will show up, and they might disagree with you. They might not even like you. You might have beefs with your family going back 5 generations, but people will show up. The second picture in on the top is one of my favorite community events here. We have a annual harvest dinner, and you can't tell, but our wildlife biologist is auctioning off a dozen eggs that one of the little ladies in our valley grew. And that dozen of eggs went for $600. And it's a way that we raise money for families in our valley. And this year we were unable to have that event. And so one of the ways that I tried to contribute to our community was by holding an event that we could safely have, and that's in the bottom right corner, and that was a poker ride. And so we tried to raise money through that to also help the families in our valley who have been struck by hard times just with COVID or anything else. Some other photos here at the top right is the Helena High School coming out to the ranch. We have a lot of relationships with different teachers in the surrounding larger towns, and so education is a big part of the ranch, and we have a lot of people come out. The bottom center corner was our annual golf tournament this year, which is also a great socially distant activity. And then the left one is our we have a big softball league here, and that's our when they won the tournament last year. So for a town of 275 people, we have quite a lot going on, and I think all of those things build community in my mind. And one of the things that I think about a lot is we have a predominantly family ranching community here still, which is pretty amazing. And as everyone knows, it's a hard business to make it in. And so bringing income to those families that's maybe off ranch for those times when agriculture isn't as profitable as you'd like it to be. So bringing in more jobs to the valley, bringing in more children for our schools is a big thing here, and bringing in more engagement and activity, and sort of maintaining these community events that we already have, but really building off of them. So I think I've learned a lot from living here, and living with, again, people who have lived together for 130 years. Yeah, it's been an amazing experience, and I hope to keep building from this community.
All right, thanks, Kate. And I imagine we'll probably talk about Blackfoot Challenge in a little bit. But I'm gonna go next to Marianna and hear her talk about her community and community building.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Kate. I love listening to all of that. I think one of the, as many folks have probably experienced that did not come from an agricultural background and have pursued opportunities in that realm, I think one of the scariest things, if not the scariest thing, is the idea of what will be there for me if I go or when I go. And how will I manage if it's not there? I think that one of the most beautiful things about this kind of lifestyle and being in love with this kind of work is that wherever you go, there are people there that are pursuing the same things. And so, you know, whether it's fate or, you know, whatever the crazy design is, you are put in contact with people that will intimately change your life. And that has very much been the experience for me, I think, in the past couple of years. You know, whether it was initially moving to Southern Colorado and, you know, working for a family that I had never met before, but had deep roots in that community going hundreds of years back, which was something from being from the West Coast that I didn't quite understand. You know, and particularly within San Luis Valley, where things can be really, really hard. To see the strength of a lot of those connections really opened my eyes to what can be built and how it can change your life for the better, and how through that you can in turn strengthen it. For me, I think an even greater test was the NAP apprenticeship that I took in Rush, Colorado, which, as Kate so eloquently put it earlier, is an hour down a dirt road somewhere. When you're there and you're working and living with 4 other people and it's just you day in and day out, you really learn what it means to depend on people. And so for me, that idea of community really began to flesh itself out, because on the day-to-day it looked like roping a calf so that I could tag it, and then having my coworker Laura chase off a very, very angry mom who was definitely not bluffing, feeling like we were almost going to die, and finishing a day of work and saying, hey, you want to have a cup of tea and watch Game of Thrones with me, you know, and plan the future, whatever we want to do. That, you know, that was an intimate community for me. So taking those experiences and coming back to California was really quite different. And in Pescadero in particular, which, if for folks who are not familiar, Pescadero is about an hour south of San Francisco, and about half an hour south of Half Moon Bay. So anyway you cut the pie, cut the cake, you know, we're 45 minutes from Palo Alto, we're 45 minutes in Santa Cruz, we're an hour from San Francisco. So we're surrounded by, you know, this very populated, very vibrant area. We're an unincorporated part of San Mateo County. So I felt like I had to relearn how I fit into the space. And so for me, in the past year and change that I've been here, one of the things that I've really tapped into is there is a very strong community here that is led by a nonprofit called Puente de la Costa Sur, which this nonprofit organization does so many things for the Pescadero community, whether it's healthcare, whether it's childcare, whether it's tutoring for students, whether it's food distribution, you name it, and Puente probably does it. And being able to recognize, you know, for me, for any rural space that I've really been in before, you know, it's been really segregated. You know, there's no other way to put it. And Puente de la Costa Sur has put in the work to connect so many facets of this community here. And so through their leadership, I've really been able to connect with people who live and work here. And that's something that's been a really, really big blessing in my life. And particularly, I think for me personally, one of the biggest worries I have always felt about being in rural spaces You know, I have a really deep attachment to the Latino community, to the Latinx community. And often the fear that I carry when I go into rural spaces for whether it's an opportunity to work or, you know, to do outreach, I fear that loss of a part of my culture, and like my lived experience, and that somehow it's not going to be seen. And in this place, I've kind of had this realization that, like, you know, there are connections here that I can't see. And I just had to have a little bit of faith. And so I feel really blessed because of that. So yeah, I think my concept of community has really kind of shifted each place that I've gone, and it's still forming, but I carry it all with me. So
thank you. All right, Shalini.
Like you, Mariana, I feel like my sense of community has been shifting and evolving over the years. Growing up, we had a very tight-knit family, whether it was on my mom's side and, you know, my Filipino family, or my dad's side with extended cousins, where any family dinner turned into like 75 people all getting together and supporting each other. And it was always really loud and rambunctious. And then having my life take me to very quiet communities, in the very literal sense of there's no one around you, there's no one around you that looks like you. And it's really actually forced me to kind of broaden my idea of what community means to me. I've now encompassed the plant communities as part of my community, and how do they give something to me and I give something back to them, or the animal community, whether it's the livestock that we're raising or the wildlife that we're trying to facilitate better habitats for them, and then the microbiological communities beneath our feet. And having that kind of encompassing feeling has actually given me a lot more comfort over the years, in times of what I perceived as isolation. That being said, I'm not saying that I just sit by myself with the plants and the animals and just spend all my time there. While it is a wonderful way to meditate for me and kind of ground myself, I still sometimes really miss that loud, rambunctious community that was so familiar to me. And I'm still finding it. I find that a lot of the people that I get along with in my local communities are those of the ones that go to the farmers market and come up and talk to me, whether they're a customer of ours or not. I'm finding that farmers markets are kind of like my hub of where I can find the people in the towns that we're serving. And so in order to chase after that, I was on the board of directors for our local farmers market, which then even broadened my community, in the sense, one of the main things that we wanted to do, and what I feel very passionate about, is getting regeneratively raised food to the people who need it the most, people whose health isn't doing very well because of the lack of nutrients throughout their whole diet. And we've worked really hard and gone door to door knocking, telling people about SNAP benefits, where you can spend your SNAP dollars, whether it is at the food co-op, local food co-ops, or at the farmers market, and getting them kind of knowing where they can get their food, and me growing my community to be able to help those in our towns of a lower socioeconomic status, has brought a lot of comfort to me, and seeing the SNAP sales go up through these facets makes me feel like we're creating a newer community of people who really do care about their health, and seeing it's right now is a really great time to be raising healthy food, because people are looking to other avenues of where their own personal health can grow, because of the pandemic going around, and wanting to boost up your immune system, and knowing that there are ways to do it through your diet. And we've been working hard at that. But yeah, it is a really tough space to be in, Marianna, when you were talking about how scary it was just to see the amount of sky. And it is a shock to the system that I still feel. Like, we just went to Montana for the weekend and I was blown away. I was like, yeah, this is big sky country. And it's not something I ever want to get used to. And it's not something I ever want to lose that awe. But it takes a lot of people out of their comfort zones. But I also felt, when I was in an isolated mindset, I found that I could reach out to other people in our industry and our local networks. There's so many of us. I mean, we're all kind of down dirt roads, but I know that there's a lot of people out there, and that also gives me comfort.
Thank you, Shalini. All right, Ben.
Well, for me, community generally has something to do with some type of mutuality or shared interest. So going beyond self-interest, but not necessarily ignoring that either. So for me, I've always thought of community as a place or the people in a place. They could be connected, without which, I as an individual wouldn't be able to be a complete or a more complete version of myself. And then that I also have an awareness that without me, the community, the group of people, or the place would also be somehow altered. And so I think the ways that I've tried to build community, and that I've seen community just happen almost by accident, are almost always when there's some kind of shared interest. And that doesn't necessarily mean that people all agree on the same issues and things. What I've seen in my work in agricultural policy and things, and as well as environmental activism, as well as just on the farm, day-to-day logistical stuff with a work crew, is as long as there's some kind of reason for people to be there and they're able to recognize and articulate those reasons, we don't all have to have the same beliefs about everything. And so that's what I love about this discussion here, is because people can work together, even though, in the last few months and this year really, it oftentimes looks like there's just so much division, but I don't really think that's the way it is. I think there's a lot more going on smaller levels and in smaller groups of people, whether that's a small town or a farmer ranch, or even a neighborhood in a larger urban center. I think there's a lot more going on in the face of all the challenges that we've had in the last few months. And so now that I'm here, I'm in a new community. Like I said earlier, I've been here for 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks. What I'm trying to do here at Wolf's Neck Center with, we have an apprenticeship program with the dairy grazing apprenticeship. And so we're bringing people here, usually from other places. And there's quite a bit of research that happens here also. And so to me, all these people are here to learn, which is very, very important to me. With a background in education as well as environmentalism and agriculture, to me, this place kind of brings together all the things that I'm passionate about. And my hope is that people everywhere can find that place or those people that does that for them. And so I'm looking forward to having more conversations about this with the people here, as well as the people on this panel. And I just want to figure out ways we can all work together and learn from each other, because I think it's very important that we do that now.
Thanks, Ben. I'm super excited about this group of people that we have here right now, and then all the people that have been coming into the NAP program and growing, all of these young agrarians. And I told all the panelists not to be, when I told them it was going to be 2 hours, everyone was like, oh God, 2 hours. And I said, don't worry, it's going to go faster than you think. And look, we're already at an hour. So I just want to take a moment here to see if there are any questions from anyone in the audience, and we'll give it a second here to see anything if it comes in. But to kind of prep us for the second section is we're going to be talking a little bit about culture. And I think it's no surprise to anyone that there are some cultural issues within agriculture that can feel very exclusionary to new people coming into agriculture if they didn't come from a family farm or ranch, and also to people of color and people who may be coming in that haven't been in communities for a long time. And I think it's important to like name these issues so that we can all talk about it, and to just kind of explore ways that maybe culture has changed, the agricultural life has changed you, or you've adapted to in the ways that you are a cultural change maker in your community and in the work that you do. And so we can take this in so many different ways, but I'd like to just maybe have a conversation between all of you instead of going from, we can start with someone, but then obviously if you guys have questions and want to talk to each other, I think that would be great to hear. So Ben, do you want to start, since we kind of are doing this back and forth through the, oh, and do we have any questions here?
We just had one that came in, okay. Alexis. So that question is having a built-in small community, i.e. a family or at least one friend, a critical piece in being able to engage successfully in a rural community?
I can answer or throw an answer out there. One of this sort of makes me feel like my time in New Mexico. When I had one friend in New Mexico, she lived 5 hours from where I was living, so we didn't meet very often. But I struggled with that, quite a bit at the beginning of my apprenticeship. I had my coworkers who are wonderful, but sometimes you need to reach outside of that for your community network. And I walked into a quilting shop on a Sunday and met all of these Texan retired ladies who gathered there every Sunday and helped each other with quilting. And so I ended up going there every Sunday that I could and spent that time with them. And I felt like that gave me a sense of community. And I don't know, so much about the engagement part, but, and I was only there for 8 months, but I feel like you can start with nothing and build something out of that. I don't think you need, one friend or one family. I think that's helpful, but I don't think you need it.
I guess I'll chime in with this as far as I don't think that it's critical either. In the day and age that we live in, I have very distinct memories of having Skype calls in the trailer that I was living at George and Julie's, reconnecting with my friends. And so right now it's not, I don't think it would be critical to have that, because you can always build from, as Kate was saying, but then not also lose connections with those that, do love and support you, even if you're not there with them physically. Mm-hmm. And it helps.
I mean, yeah, to echo what Kate and Shalini said, I think that it's, once again, it's a scary thought to think of just plopping yourself into whatever situation and be like, okay, I'm just going to go from here. But that's what happens. And I think that depending on where you are, like, spiritually and, emotionally, I think that's a big piece of it. I know for me, I was really scared, but I was able to make those connections that I did because I recognized that I was scared, and then I was able to say, okay, what next? And that's a really big piece, and that's not an easy thing to do. So for me to speak about it lightly in those terms, I don't want to make it seem like it was chump change to make that transition, but I think it does take some personal work to put yourself in that space mentally. So.
And I think some of you may get into this next question in the next section here about some of the entrances or sort of ways to enter into or engage in rural communities. Yeah, and I also see other folks chiming into the chat, so that is great. Like if people in the audience have things that have worked for them that you want to share, we would love to have you add them.
All right, so we can move on a little bit to some cultural questions and issues, and where we see we can make change to be more inclusive in our communities.
I guess I can start off. As far as the culture of agriculture gave me a relationship with the land and food that I never expected, and I'm super grateful for. But it is a very challenging setting. Personally, I would say I have so many people who tell me like, oh, your story is so inspiring. You're a woman of color who's trying to get into farming and ranching in rural communities, and you don't have the background, like you're changing things, and I've never felt like I can own up to that. I struggle with that identity in a sense, because before farming was kind of trendy and a really cool thing to do, people of color, people all over the world are doing this and have been doing this since the beginning of our species, because we have to eat. And I don't feel like a change maker, rather it's just something that I feel we need to acknowledge that it's not an equal setting anymore as it once was, and maybe it wasn't at some point. But in our own agricultural community, it is sad to see that it's, when I walk into conferences and I'm the only person of color in the industry, or we go to ag schools or marketing schools for direct marketing, your farm products are farm to table restaurants, and the disparity that I have seen, I don't have solutions, but it is something that I think that we should all be cognizant about. And I mean, personally saying that, yeah, I'm the only person of color in a room, I grew up with that. Like I came back from kindergarten telling my parents like, hey, I'm the only Black person in my classroom as a kindergartner. And it's a very weirdly comfortable setting for me because it's something that I've grown up with. But then I have to look back and people say like, you are a change maker, you make it okay for other people, but how do we make it even safer for someone who, unlike myself, isn't comfortable being the only minority in a room? And where do we change things from here? But I think that I also like that I can challenge other people. Last year, I had an opportunity for the Month of Nutrition to go on our local news channel and speak about our farmers market and what nutrient-dense food might be. And I was there representing our farm. And the anchor looked at me, he was like, okay, well, what do you do on the ranch? Like, you're just the marketing. I was like, no, we just, like, I grow the food too. And it was interesting to watch him be taken aback, but also knowing that he's on live TV and not knowing what to do with those responses was really fun in the moment. Like, it was kind of fun to take that preconceived notion down. but it is a preconceived notion in our society right now of what a farmer and rancher might look like. But yeah, it is something that I think a lot of us might struggle with, and I'm not sure where to go besides me. Anyone else?
Yeah. Shalini, thanks for sharing. I think that this topic for me has remained a really difficult one to try and work through and chew through. And I don't foresee it becoming any easier for me to grapple with. And so I think I've come to the point where I have to accept that for me, it's complicated. There's a lot of nuance to my experiences and my experiences in ag. I think, when I spoke earlier about being raised in Napa and having one half of my family be brown and the other half be white, I look back at some of those family exchanges and think, oh God, like Thanksgiving was really interesting. And on a deeper level, for me, being someone who is both Latina and white, understanding what it means to be mixed race, and how it's kind of fed this feeling I hold where I don't really feel like I fit in one space or the other. I'm constantly bouncing back and forth. And within the context of ag, that plays itself out. 96%, I think, of our labor force in agriculture is Latino. And the whole slew of issues and abuses and exploitation that comes with that at the hands of white landowners, white farmers, white ranchers. That is hard for me to understand. I have a roommate who is an apprentice on this ranch here who put it into words really beautifully for me last year. And was like, this is a part of your journey. The blood memory that you carry, from family backgrounds of being exploited and also, of being conqueror and also the conquered. Very, very complex things. I read a lot of books. And on an even more personal level, my dad, he passed away last year of cancer. And he spent the majority of his life working in the vineyards. And, it doesn't take a scientist to know what is used and what gets sprayed in production ag and the people who work in it and what they're exposed to. And so that is a piece that really hurts me. I don't know what made my dad sick ultimately, but I could make a very good educated guess as to what did. And so with all of that context and nuance in mind, moving forward in these spaces and feeling like, what are the pieces that I can heal within myself from these experiences? What is the trauma that I carry that is mine? And what is the trauma that I carry that isn't mine? That's passed down from generation to generation. And what space can I fill that doesn't overtake space that should be meant for others? And I think I've really come to recognize that I feel my role in ag is to uplift others. And particularly, for communities of color who, like Shalini said, have been the mothers of agriculture since the beginning of time. Knowing that those communities are looking for self-agency. And there is no need for saviorism of any kind. There is a need for advocacy and for understanding and for empathy and, you know, the room for nuance and things that are complex. You know, I think one of the big things I've taken away from holistic management in particular is the understanding between complex and complicated systems. We are complex. We are not complicated. There is not a plug this in and then everything will work fine. Hell no. Pardon my language, but absolutely not. And so I think for me, presently, and particularly in the context of movement for Black lives and, you know, this massive upheaval we've seen from communities that have been clamoring for justice. You know, I've really shifted my lens to where does my energy need to go. And I think that agriculture represents a beautiful opportunity for that healing. If those energies are not focused on that kind of healing, you know, connecting those pieces, connecting those communities, and righting those wrongs, it will just continue to do harm, you know, whether we intend to or not. And that's the hard thing about it. So, yeah.
I just want to thank Marianna for that response. It really made me think about, well, what I struggle with. That's this question. I just always focus on what I struggle with, because I think change happens through struggle and through being challenged. And so, you know, I mean, as a white male in agriculture, you know, I struggle with owning and acknowledging, you know, the great privilege that I have in this space, because I know that most of the people who are seen as thought leaders are people in my demographic. And I know that there's way more to the story, and there's way more voices that need to be heard, and many more stories that need to be told. And so one of the things that I battle with is just like that knowledge that and desire to just get out of the way, you know, and listen to those other voices. But I struggle with that because it would be so easy for me to just disengage or ignore conversations that challenge me, or avoid conflict. And so to me, you know, when I'm thinking about my identity, that's, I think, hopefully a way that we can change. And so I guess maybe one of the things that I'm trying to do, or have tried to do, is ask questions of those who don't seem to be speaking, or who don't seem to be heard. So like to use a classroom analogy, you know, the student that's in the back of the room that doesn't speak up all the time or doesn't raise their hand. So one of the things that I like to do in the communities that I'm part of, is just bring people to the farm, or ask people to come, you know, experience the farm, who maybe feel like they haven't had that opportunity, or maybe feel like they aren't the kind of person that could be on a farm. Because there's so much gatekeeping and toxicity, especially in agriculture. And a lot of it has to do with the idea of ownership. And so there needs to be a change of ownership, for one. But I think maybe our ideas about ownership just need to change completely. Because I think, as we've learned, many of us have learned, and especially people trying to get into agriculture, land ownership isn't necessarily a means to an end, and it might not even be a healthy end goal for people. So those are things that I struggle with. Those are things that I think about. I don't know if I've been a change maker in those regards, but I'll keep trying, I guess.
Hey, Ben, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the gatekeeping? We kind of talked about it in a phone call, but like just a little bit more in like that kind of perception of like there are people that are allowed in and not, you know?
Sure. Well, I mean, you see it a lot on social media. You see it a lot when people criticize practices in agriculture or agricultural policies. Oftentimes, they'll be immediately questioned. Well, are you even a farmer, or do you have any experience with conventional agriculture? Or do you even know what organic means, or just whatever it might be? It's just like there's always this thing where you like have to prove that you know enough, that you're like enough of an expert to even have an opinion. And I think that just keeps a lot of people out. And a lot of people aren't interested in trying to enter an industry or work within a field or in a community where people are constantly questioning your credibility or your validity. And it's a lot of times based on your identity, like who you are, like how many generations have you been farming? Like, are you do you even, and so that's something that I've kind of resisted. I come from a multi-generational ranch. I could probably go home and take over the family ranch, but I've decided not to do that with my life. I am a landowner. I started a business. I bought land. I grew that business and then decided to lease that whole thing to someone else who's younger than me, who I'm not related to, who I didn't even know 6 months ago, but who I felt had some of the same goals as I had, who had good ideas. And so there was a lot of fear. I was surprised by how scared I was to do that and how hard it was for me to trust that person. So that's a very real thing that I think we need to address, but we're not going to address it by not having conversations or by stopping conversations before they start, just because somebody's great grandpa didn't farm the same land in the same place for 80 years or something like that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I feel like I'm very deep in thought, and coming out of it is going to be a little bit of a challenge. I just want to say thank you to all three of you for all of those very thought-provoking comments. And, I really appreciate Shalini and Marianna's, perspectives on this. Similar to Ben, I have white privilege, and so that's not been an obstacle for me. There have been others, but that is not a big one that I have had to experience. And so I can really appreciate the courage of these women and all people who face that bias. And I think that's sort of one thing I want to talk about is just bias, and we talk about any sort of bias, whether it's I think one of the things a lot of agrarians new agrarians are up against, especially if they're from urban areas, is political or value differences, where you have to be surrounded by a group of people that you feel not only may they might see things differently than you, but also they might judge you for your views on things. And I think I've been focusing a lot, Shalini brought this up on our pre-meeting for this, as far as a change maker, if you have opinions that are different than other people's, what are you doing to maybe expose them to some of the reasons that you feel the way you do? And how difficult it feels to engage in conversations about things that are hard or that feel very polarizing right now. Marianna said this earlier, humans are complex. And I think that it's really important to recognize that people are multiple things. We don't come in a package of, if this is what you look like, these are the things that you believe. Or if this is where you're from, these are the values that you have. I think it's really important to recognize that everyone is an individual and everyone has a unique life experience that you can't replicate. And so I think personally, I feel pretty like I've come to a place where I see people that have different political views than me, but are great neighbors, good friends, are very special to me. And I don't see them for their political views. I see that as one very small part of who they are. But I worry a lot about being given that same grace. Are people going to learn one thing about me and put me into a box? And so I think to me, that's one of my challenges as far as, breaching that, those conversations with people around me is, and I've been here a year and a half, and I'm now starting to feel comfortable, kind of showing aspects of myself that might be controversial in this community. And I feel like that time is important, and putting in that time is important. And one other thing I just wanted to say, we talk about struggles, and I think one of the struggles I do have living in this rural community is not being able to feel like I'm engaging enough in our larger issues and larger struggles as a nation. One example is this summer when the Black Lives protests were going on. I was in the middle of chemotherapy. I was unsure about my ability to go out and protest because of coronavirus, and was feeling like I was cut off at the knees for to be able to speak out about something that I felt strongly about. And so, I struggle with that, is like how I can feel certain things or think certain things, but how do I engage in a meaningful way with those things? And one thing I did was I started a book club where we started reading different books about racism in this country, or by different Black authors, and that made me feel like I was doing maybe something. But I really struggle with that ability to not only engage with my local community, but also engage on national issues that I feel isolated from sometimes.
Thank you guys. That was amazing. Leah, do we have any questions in the chat box that are relevant to this?
Yeah, we've had a handful of great questions come in, and also a handful of folks sort of sharing their own experience being on the receiving end of gatekeeping. So one of the questions was about like how, as individuals, can we challenge or question gatekeeping, either when we see it, experience it, or when we do it to others?
I guess to me, it is a huge challenge. If as a young agrarian, right now, most of us aren't the landowners. We're not the bosses. We're not primary decision makers yet. Working on transitioning on that. We'll maybe get there in the future. But not feeling like you're in a position of authority and witnessing gatekeeping happening to what you are doing, or maybe even what your bosses are doing, is a really difficult place to come from, saying like, I'm sorry, that's not an okay thing to say. And like, it's an isolating feeling at the same time. I'm not actually answering your question, unfortunately, as far as mainly like an understanding that this is a challenge that we're facing, and maybe there's more courageous people out there than myself. And I appreciate you. I'll take a class or a course and work on myself from you for that. But it is one of the biggest challenges I think that a lot of us face, is being able to recognize these issues and feeling pretty helpless about it, because, okay, if I speak up about it, will I lose this position? Will I undermine what my bosses might be saying? Will I undermine the vision of the family ranch that I am joining? Am I going to step on toes that I don't want to step on because their toes are bigger than mine, very literally and metaphorically? And so I guess it's a wonderful question. I don't have an answer, but knowing, I guess, that there's a lot of other people who struggle with it, I can find strength in that.
And maybe just to sort of add on to that first question as well, a few people have pointed out some of the extra challenges that come where, maybe you are a total newcomer to community that is, primarily 4th and 5th generation families. And, do you think that in some cases your neighbors are feeling threatened, and that's why some of the gates are coming up? And so how do you navigate so that, you still have your voice heard, but, you're also being aware of why some of those gates might be coming up and sort of the history there?
Ooh, good question. Speaking of complex, thanks for sharing, Shalini. Leah, thanks for tagging that in there. I also have a really hard time with this whole concept of, when you see something that you don't agree with, what can you say and how do you say it? Or if you don't, why you don't? And I think, Shalini laid it out pretty clearly, is that power systems are very hard to change. And so one of the things for me as an apprentice, as I've gone through multiple internships and apprenticeships now in the past few years, is that there's not a very good awareness of the power dynamics that exist within those environments. And it's been really difficult for me as someone at the bottom rung of the ladder in a certain environment to be asked, well, what is your opinion on this? And then they share it, not really be heard, and then see in certain situations have retribution happen for that sharing. And I'm not in a position where I feel like I can put my livelihood at risk, like so many others who are in this space and in this environment. I have student loans, I take care of my family, all this stuff, all these things that people have. And so there needs to be, I think, a mindfulness of the power dynamic that exists. And, the question about the gatekeepers and the status quo is that I think that people fear losing power, whether or not they have an understanding of what that really means. And so when people fear losing their power, they put defenses up. And, I think that I've seen that in like small interactions of my own, and also, played out at a national level. And Yeah, that's a very, very complex thing. I think for me, just an understanding of power dynamics and a mindfulness that needs to be displayed about those situations. Because I've been in the situation in the past as an intern and apprentice. Somebody with a Latino last name, somebody with perhaps a different lived experience, where I'm then tokenized and fetishized and on a little bit of a pedestal and asked, we want to do these things, we want to change these things, will you do them? But there's no safe space for me to really land when I do that. And it makes me very, very, very hesitant to engage in those ways. So, like Shalini, I don't really have a good answer for this. If anybody has feedback they want to put in the chat, please do it.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Am I?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, my name is Alex. Thank you, Marianna, for sharing that. I actually work with Marianna at Tomcat Ranch. I'm also an apprentice there. Yeah, I kind of wanted to jump in. I definitely feel all of this very strongly, the whole gatekeeping thing. So a little bit of background, just so you guys know where I'm coming from. I did not grow up in agriculture, a lot like Shalini. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I went to Cal Poly, and I wasn't an animal science major, but my roommates were. And I was like, hey, that's super cool. Got in, and when I saw what they were doing, and I wanted to get into the whole ag world, I was studying landscape architecture, and it was really hard. It felt like that was the first gate. I was like, what? This is like a club. But started working at Swanton Pacific Ranch. Shout out Marianna. And it was amazing just how much crossed over from agriculture to landscape architecture and how much those worlds connected, and they weren't talking or making that connection. So I was like, okay, this is a thing, got to pursue it. And I realized making my way as not only someone who didn't grow up in ag, but a girl of color in a predominantly white school, and I was starting to realize work industry. And I'm also a vegetarian. Being that person and coming in and trying to make a space for myself and seeing like, okay, this girl doesn't know what she's talking about, it was very difficult, but kept at it. And once I felt like I finally started saying like, this is something I really want to pursue, and started working in it and making somewhat of a presence in that space, then I had an interesting situation that I didn't foresee, where the other party that was like challenging me was my own culture. I am Mexican, and my family was sitting in LA, has never, this generation had never worked with their hands, putting it on the land and growing their own food. Was like, why are you doing this? We moved from Mexico. We like have been working to give you a better life. Why do you want to go back to the fields and put your hands in the dirt when you're going to school to get a college degree? So I was suddenly like, oh my gosh, like, and Shalini, this is kind of bringing up like the whole, as a colored woman, like walking on eggshells, trying to see where I fit in, and realizing like my whole family is like in that same boat, and I don't know why. And I realized maybe this is like part of that change, that solution is really, instead of treating, I kind of see it as, instead of treating the symptoms, it's like the root cause. And I think that root cause is making sure that people, especially kids of different cultures and backgrounds, know that they have a place on the land, know that they have a place, no matter what their culture's history was with the land, even though that is really important, knowing that they themselves should be working with the land and have a space for it, so that when they do go to a farm or to a national forest or something, they don't feel like they have to walk on eggshells. And yeah.
Thanks, Alex. Do you want to just stay with us in our speaker panel? I think it would be great. Thank you guys. So that's great. I think maybe we could start to, we've got about 20 minutes left, and what I would like to hear from everyone is sort of your vision for the future. Like, how would you, all the things we've been talking about. So how do you stay motivated to keep doing what you're doing, and like, where are you going, and where can we go with you in this process? And I won't call on you, I'll just let you talk. So whoever feels motivated, okay.
Nominate Kate to speak.
I thought Ben was unmuting. So I think as far as the motivation goes, I feel very motivated by my community here. I feel very motivated, I touched on this earlier, but by supporting family ranching, especially in Montana, where we have a lot of out-of-state wealthy landowners moving in and changing the ownership of, you know, pretty much all of Montana and, you know, many other places across the West. So really supporting the families here. And I haven't really touched on this because trying to be respectful of everyone's time, but I am working for an organization called the Blackfoot Challenge, which is a local watershed conservation group. And they have been around for 50 years and have done amazing work when it comes to collaborative grassroots conservation, and serve as a model for a lot of other watershed groups that are starting up. And you know, the rule that they live by is called the 80-20 rule, and it's you find the 80% that you can find common ground on, and you leave the 20% for later. And so with 50 years of history in this valley, you know, we have one of the highest densities of land trusts, you know, ground and conservation easements in the state, and this legacy of trust amongst parties that view things totally differently and have different interests. And I am very motivated to maintain and grow that because I recognize that it's really precious. And so, you know, as far as one person can reach, I feel like that is where my heart lies. And I'm currently working on drought management, and we have a new or a water right that used to be a hydropower right that was changed into a fisheries water right and was given back to the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribes here in Montana. I meant to mention that earlier, that I'm currently ranching on ground that is ancestral to the people that are now considered the Salish Kootenai tribes. And so I'm really motivated to steward that water right. That's a big part of my job, is to make sure that the water resources on this land that are now co-owned by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and the Confederated Salish Kootenai are stewarded to the best of my ability. So just a few things that are very motivated, and we talk a little bit about self-care in this question, and hanging out with my dogs is pretty much the best medicine there is. So yeah, thank you guys.
Probably my biggest motivation is my daughter. Before I started a family and started that journey, you know, things that I did, you know, especially with agriculture and, you know, activism, it was a lot more self-focused, maybe more ego-driven. But when you have a responsibility to family, especially, you know, someone that's so much younger and so much more vulnerable, I think that changes the way that you make decisions, and it changes just your priorities. And so I think that yeah, self-care definitely is something that has to be part of that. Focusing on personal mental health and wellness, but because if what you do is harming your mind and your body, it's really difficult for you to continue doing that. And so I think that there has been much more of an awareness and focus on mental health and agriculture lately. I've been a part of some good conversations and workshops and educational programs for that. And so I just really think that those things are very useful and make me, for one, want to keep going and challenging myself, because without those support networks, a lot of what I do would not be possible. And I know there's a lot of people coming from a lot of different places, and I think it's very difficult to find solutions or things that work for everyone. But I like the question, what is your motivation? Because I think identifying what your motivations are is like probably one of the first steps that you can make to self-care and self-awareness and mental health. So that's what I think.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks for sharing that, Ben. I would say my motivation is a life lesson that my dad had passed on to me from a very young age, in that you always leave a place better than how you found it. I remember really resenting as like a 4-year-old, and he made us sprint around the tennis court and pick up all the trash not on our court, but the entire park before we could even start playing. And it's something that's really stuck with me, in the sense that it motivates me to focus on my day-to-day. It's really easy in our current political climate, as well as environmental climate, to kind of succumb to the existential crises of how are we going to fix this? What's going to happen? Am I even making a difference? And it's a rabbit hole that I'm not saying that I've never jumped through, because let's be real, 2020, but in a way that my motivation of knowing that I am going to make a difference on this piece of land today, or I'm going to make a difference in this customer's life because they get food that'll be more nutritious today. And kind of focusing on those small differences that I can make this area around me a better place kind of keeps me going. It's my drive, and it also brings me joy. But it also, as Ben was saying, there is a more of a spotlight on mental health and agricultural today in our community. But while we're still in the communities surrounded by the older generation, where if you don't take a break, you're not working hard enough ever, in that sort of destructive mindset of you have to basically kill yourself to be successful in this industry, in a mental state. And working with the people on the ranch around us, of being able to take those breaks, being able to say, hey, let's go crack open a can in the middle of the field and just enjoy the sunset and enjoy where we're at. And then another, to relate back to my communities answer, is I focus on the plant communities, the livestock, and the the biological communities around me bolster me, and also keep me motivated and bring me joy. But thank you all for sharing.
This is also, I think, a hard question for me, and I appreciate the transparency that the other panelists have given in this regard. I think 2020 and political climate and environmental climate and COVID And, you know, more recently, the fires on the coast here, it just feels like, it has felt like just wave after wave after wave. And I think for me, you know, that coupled with like a lot of deeply personal healing that still needs to happen, you know, in spaces that I exist in outside of work. It's been really, really hard. I think what the reminders for me are more like little glimpses. Like, so for example, the past few months, I really haven't had a lot of days to go work with the cows just because I've been so wrapped up in trying to figure out how Google Sheets works and how to manage inventory for a bunch of dead meat. Much things that are very good skills to have, maybe are not my deepest passions in the world. But, you know, the other day I got to go out to one of our lease properties and work cows with a couple of the other apprentices and their regenerative ranching coordinator. And to be able to share that space with other women and to be helpful. I found myself at the end of that day just feeling so good about what I had done and the space that I had been in. And so it's those pieces that remind me, this is where you feel good. You know, pay attention to this because this means something. And so for me, it's kind of like collecting those pieces and taking those pieces and how do I kind of puzzle piece them into the life that I really, you know, I want to have. And in regards to community, you know, being able to recognize like, this is my skill set and this is what I do well. And this is what I can bring to the table, and having people that can appreciate that is really, really huge. So yeah, I think the little thing, yeah, just working with the cows, man, that probably. Yeah.
How about you, Alex?
Yeah, that's all really, those are really good points. I think asking yourself what is your motivation, like Ben was saying, is super important, especially on a bigger scale, like what's my drive that keeps me going. And then kind of touch on what Marianna was saying about the little things. Something that I've been recently asking everyone and all my friends is like, what's something each day, like a little thing that brings you delight? This is like something small that you notice that just like no matter what, just gives you a little giddy feeling. For me, I love, this is kind of weird, but I love putting frozen blueberries in my cereal in the morning, and it makes the milk turn like light purple and it's just extra cold. And that's just something that like makes me happy. And then also like the smell of like Jeffrey pine when you're hitting the mountain air and it just smells different. Like those little things really just like, they bring me delight, and it's like daily little motivational things that I think are really important to remember and kind of keep track of and stuff. So I don't know if you guys want to ask yourselves what are little things that bring you delight throughout your day. I think it's just fun to keep track of. Keep you going.
Thanks. Wow, so we are 6 more minutes left and we've covered a lot of ground, and you guys have been amazing and so inspiring and thoughtful. And I just want to say, I know that us asking you to do this, it's a big thing to ask for you guys to come spend 2 hours and share your authentic selves and be super honest, and that it takes a lot of like, there's nervousness and a lot of thought that went into what you guys talked about today. And I think it's really important for us as a community. And I'm so excited about the network that is being created with not just the new agrarian program, but just all young agrarians out there trying to do things differently and move in this space that's not easy to do. And I think that you guys giving those examples for everyone to just see what you guys have been doing and how you've been doing it and how you've been thinking about it, and that we might not have all of the answers, but us sort of struggling with the questions together is actually doing a lot to move forward and to change and to be better. And I just appreciate you guys taking the time to do that, because I think I just am amazed at what you all have done and what you had to share today. And I know that everyone on this call, it seems like we've had so many people just super engaged, and I know they're all happy to have you here too. So is there any last thoughts that you want to share? Any last questions?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that came in, and yeah, it just sort of blows me away that I think with this panel and then the collective, group of the bigger audience, that we could probably spend all day talking. One of the questions was directed, I think, to you, Ben, but I think if any of you want to try to answer it really quickly. Ben briefly brought up some of the problems with ownership, and if you want to just really briefly say, what's wrong with the current model and what new directions might you suggest we go?
Sure. Well, when I said we need a change of ownership, I don't necessarily mean that we just need to change who has the role of owner in the system. I think we need to change the definition of ownership. And this is something I've thought about for a long time. Years and years ago, I read William Kittredge's book, Who Owns the West? And he talks a lot about this idea of ownership and how it's, especially in Western mythology and Western ways of thinking, it's just like the most important thing. And like oftentimes you hear young people who want to get into agriculture and they feel like they have to own land in order to do that, or own livestock in order to do that. But I think the way into agriculture so often is more your skill set and your attitude and your willingness to learn. Or I hope that it will continue to become that. And so just the idea of ownership has so much baggage that comes with it. So it's so much rooted in capitalism and patriarchy and colonialism. And we just have to either stop using that word or change what it means somehow.
Yeah, go Ben. I echo everything that Ben said.
Yeah, and I guess there's just been a lot of amazing comments in the chat box of, people sort of sharing what has really excited them about this conversation. And we're coming up on the end of the hour here, but just sort of one of the things that is coming up is like, where do we go from here? How do we put this into practice? These ideas of getting rid of gatekeeping and power dynamics, how do we bring it in to regenerative agriculture? That's a big question, but maybe someone has just one little nugget they want to share before we go.
I think, again, not with the answering of the question, it's an opening of the dialogue is, I think, the most important takeaway from this panel for myself, and hearing all the wonderful experiences of the fellow panelists and the comments from everybody, which has been really wonderful. And I really appreciate getting the opportunity to do this. But moving forward and trying to change perspectives in the grand scheme of our agricultural society, I think we can look to opening up these harder conversations in a broader sense. Personally, finding the courage to have these harder conversations with closer community members people who come out to the ranch and visit and aren't expecting to see, you know, everything that we're doing, or someone like me farming, like approaching these things and having open dialogues beyond at a conference where I think all of us are very similar thinkers, and we all want to see progress in the same way. And it's easy for us to surround ourselves and feel bolstered that we all feel the same in our own specific areas. But then how do we open up these conversations in a setting that it's not going to be as welcomed? It's hard. There's eggshells all over. But knowing that there's so much support and so many other like thinkers in this world gives me hope, strength, and courage. And I appreciate all of you for that. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Shalini. That was a perfect way to end it. And I'm just going to let that be the end. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the panelists. You guys are amazing. Thank you to Alex for jumping on and staying with us at the end here. You're great. And I think, Leah, is there something tomorrow we need to announce for the final?
Yeah.